Right, so the fallout from Keir Starmer, aka War Crimes Keith, for his comments on LBC, which we've all heard by now, where he told Nick Ferrari that Israel does have the right to cut off electricity and water, when that was specifically put to him as being huge. At the time I covered it in another video, some dozen councillors had resigned, that has risen, and it isn't just councillors quitting either. What hasn't helped have been the actions by the party since, a letter to councillors trying to clarify their position, which was ridiculed, followed by confirmation that the party diktat on banning elected officials attending pro-Palestine rallies was still in place. Starmer being put on the spot in an interview himself, now denying he ever said he backed Israel committing a war crime, which we all heard him do. So he's decided the best course of action is to keep on lying about it. And now, this morning, confirmation that there will be no apology. There will be more resignations then. With the Tories on their backsides more than ever in their party history, why is Starmer determined to help them out by scandalising himself and Labour unnecessarily and not just say sorry? Right, so Keir Starmer once said in the run-up to be Labour leader that the buck would always stop with him. Well, he lied about everything else he stood for, why not that too? When have you ever heard him apologise for making a mistake? Never. It's always somebody else's fault, so they cop the flak. This time, however, he can't do that. He was asked a question. He answered it in the worst way imaginable. He has nobody to blame. So instead he's flat out denying he ever said it. I'll remind you of those words. Nick Ferrari asked him, a siege is appropriate, cutting off power, cutting off water, Sir Keir. To which he received the answer, I think that Israel does have that right. It is an ongoing situation. Obviously everything should be done within international law, but I don't want to step away from the sort of core principles that Israel has a right to defend herself and Hamas bears responsibility for these terrorist acts. And I would call on all responsible states, particularly Middle East responsible states, to call this out for what it is and to stand with the world in condemning these actions by Hamas. Israel has that right to cut off power and water. His words. He might have tried to caveat that by saying everything should be done within international law, but as a human rights lawyer, he should know such acts as he had just advocated were war crimes and therefore impossible to be within international law. He either screwed up, which warrants an apology and a retraction, or he didn't know the relevant law, which casts further doubt on his already dubious legal career, but especially in human rights, as this was supposed to be his specialism. That should at the very least warrant an apology as well. So however you read this, the decent, humane thing to do is hold up your hands, say sorry, fully retract, and move on. Instead, he has let that fester in the air for well over a week, presumably because, even though he must know he's in the wrong, it's appealing to those Tory votes that he's chasing, the hard right, even if those two by-elections this week showed Tory voters stayed at home by and large instead of voting for him, Labour's vote merely holding up, whereas the Tory vote totally collapsed. Instead, the reaction has been the erosion of his own support and his own councillors, 21 of whom have quit the party around the country at time of writing. A total of 8 of them, notably, on Oxford City Council, 2 last week, a further 6 since, meaning that Labour has now lost control of that council entirely. The bit that tickles me here is that Oxford is the local Labour Party stomping ground of that most pro-Israel of Labour figures, Luke Akehurst, and his response to that, I think, sums up what the current party leadership think of a great many of us. He put out a tweet saying, I was gutted about brilliant Oxford Labour councillors Shyster and Amar resigning last week. Good riddance to these 6 ineffective momentum hacks. They were never Labour, always momentum. And Labour to win, the Blue Labour faction are real Labour then, I suppose. The trying to H-Tory the Tory caucus within Labour. Get real. A statement was then issued by the party, of course, to councillors seeking to mitigate matters, clarify what Starmer really meant. The trouble is that came along with a diktat from David Evans, the General Secretary, saying the imposed ban on attending pro-Palestine rallies still stood. So it was complete word salad in the end, and more resignations followed. A further 36 councillors across 3 councils in Kirklees, Leicester and Walsall have publicly distanced themselves from Starmer's words now as well. On top of that, up in Scotland, 9 members of Glasgow Kelvin's constituency Labour Party have resigned. CLP executive members have been quitting over this up and down the country as well, along with many ordinary members. All momentum hacks as well, I'm sure, Luke. But what makes the Glasgow Kelvin CLP news a bit more notable is that one of their executive happens to be a Labour peer, Baroness Bryan of Partick. Not yet quit the party as I understand, but could that change? Well, let's go back to War Crimes Keith for an update, shall we? Last Friday, Starmer was interviewed by ITV News and he was asked, "You gave an interview the other day in which you implied that it was justified for Israel to cut off Gaza's power and water supply. Is that what you meant?" Opportunity to clarify, to retract and to apologise, set the matter straight, hold your hands up, to say something stupid. Cue the response from Starmer, who said, of course, "Well, I welcome this question because I know that LBC clip has been widely shared and caused real concern and distress in some Muslim communities. So let me be clear about what I was saying and what I wasn't saying. I was saying that Israel had the right to self-defence, and that when I said that right, it was that right to self-defence. I was not saying that Israel has a right to cut off water, food, fuel or medicines. For over a week now, I have been leading the charge, calling for that humanitarian aid to come in. We all know there are innocent civilians in Gaza and a humanitarian crisis, 1 million children. That aid urgently needs to get in. So I was saying, yes, they have the right to self-defence. That right they do have, but not the right to withhold that humanitarian aid that needs to get in. It is now absolutely urgent, and that's why I have been calling for this for over a week." First off, the one bit I agree with, the aid must get in. I'm sure we all agree with that. Trucks have been able to cross into Gaza from Egypt through the Rafah border at last. About time too. As for the rest of it, well, where was that apology and retraction then? What we got instead was a flat denial of what everyone heard him say on LBC. You did say they had the right to withhold water and power. Food and medicines weren't mentioned, so nice try at that going over and above. But that recording isn't going to go away, and it says what it says. It can't lie. It doesn't lie, unlike you. And this story won't either, for as long as Starmer basically insists we all misheard him, or we misunderstood him. It seems pretty damn clear to me what he said, even if that wasn't what he meant. Either way, apologise for confusion caused if that's the case, but he can't do it. He cannot accept having made a mistake, so who are we to believe him now and not then? Why would we trust the word of someone who lies like he does anyway, lies like a rug? It smacks of a little bit of panic coming as well that he's gone this far though. As usually he just ignores his critics and carries on regardless. He's got a hell of a lot of them right now. Those protests we've been seeing in London, in Glasgow, in Liverpool, some of the biggest demos we've seen in this country, there's no denying it. Certainly the largest pro-Palestine ones. They're all shouting Rishi Sunak, shame on you. But they're also out there shouting Keir Starmer, shame on you. On this Israel-Palestine matter, there's no moral high ground for either of the two main parties. The public is disgusted with both. That panic I mentioned, though, is that this harms Labour more than it does the Tories, since some 30 Labour parliamentary seats in this country rely on the strong Muslim vote coming out for them. Typically Muslims do, by and large, vote Labour rather than Tory. And with this flat refusal to meaningfully accept his wrongdoing, that refusal to apologise, those are significant numbers of seats that Labour could lose if, like we've seen Tory voters do in both by-elections this week, they choose to stay at home. He has, of course, insulted them even further. He said in that most recent interview that he'd been leading the charge for humanitarian aid to get in. He had to get another lie in, didn't he? All Starmer has done all week is cheerlead for Netanyahu. It's been a toss-up as to whose head is further up that man's posterior right now, though I suppose since Sunak is actually in Israel, we'll have to give him a literal head start. When you say you're the one calling for humanitarian aid going to Gaza, yet are still banning your own elected members from showing solidarity with Palestine too, as your actions are an attempt at showing, the lies become even more obvious and blatant, as does the hypocrisy, and again it is insulting and driving members away, driving elected officials to resign. If you don't do something meaningful, if something doesn't basically come from Starmer himself at this point, in the form of an apology and a retraction, well, this weekend we're no closer to that apology. So more resignations are probably on the cards. Cue Lisa and Andy to do the damage limitation on Laura Kuenssberg's show this morning. Once more, an improvement this week with the continued lack of Kuenssberg and the presence of Victoria Derbyshire once more instead. Because Derbyshire put to Andy, he, Starmer, was asked on LBC if an Israeli siege was appropriate, including cutting off power, cutting off water, and he replied, "I think Israel does have that right." Why did he say that? And Andy responded by saying he's clarified that this week, that he was answering the previous question, and then went on to talk about the importance of international law. I was with Keir on the 7th of October when we held a vigil at Labour Party conference in support of Israeli civilians and what had happened with the horrendous Hamas attack. He made the point at that vigil that international law must be respected and upheld, and he's made it many, many times. quick denial. He was answering the previous question, was he? How come Starmer hasn't said that previously when he was interviewed by ITV then? He claims he was misunderstood, so come on, at least get your lies straight. And then, of course, Nandy deflects onto a vigil for the Israeli victims and makes claims that can't be substantiated regarding Starmer and international law. We only have her word for it because he has made comments this week implying he either does not respect international law or doesn't understand it. Derbyshire responded to all of this by saying, the problem is it took him 9 days to issue the clarification you just referenced, and in that time a number of people in Britain's Muslim community have expressed anger at what he said and at the position of the Labour Party. Various Muslim councillors have resigned. The Labour Muslim Network has asked for an apology. Will they get one? Yes, ask directly. At last, somebody in the media has done it. So come on, Nandy. Tell us when Keith is finally going to give Muslims around this country the apology they are owed by him. Nandy responded by saying, we can't apologise for holding a position we've never held. Keir has been clear and consistent on this. Forget it, Lisa. Not interested in a fudge. Starmer holds a consistent position for only as long as the wind blows in that direction, and Derbyshire wasn't having any of this either. She chipped back in with, he wasn't clear on that day with LBC though, was he? Cue more waffle from Nandy that I won't bother going into here. Suffice to say, there's no apology coming. There isn't even a conscious acknowledgement that they've done anything wrong at all. Keir Starmer is acting like the world's dumbest scumbag right now, and only seems set on consolidating his position there, no matter how much backlash he faces as the death toll in Palestine increases to the point nearly 5,000 are dead, over 1,200 of those are children, so many have died in fact they've run out of body bags in Gaza now, and coffins are having to be trucked in, along with that aid. He thinks he knows better than us, he thinks he is better than us, he's as arrogant as he is insulting, and we need better, far, far better than him to lead this country. I for one am sick of being embarrassed by those who keep getting given the top job in this country. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Do have your say on this in the comments below as well and be part of the conversation. What do you think of Starmer's position here and what he is doing? What do you think it will take to get an apology out of him, if there is anything? Do let me know. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Muslims are already deserting the party and he's making things worse. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so the by-election failures by the Tories this week, despite media narratives squealing about a Labour landslide, actually showed that the Labour vote stood still whilst the Tory vote completely collapsed. Tens of thousands of Tories staying at home, and let's face it, if they aren't turning out, you can't win. It doesn't matter how much you rig the electoral system, how big your majority might be, you can't force people to actually vote, and therefore you can't actually win. It's a shocker actually, because Tory voters are usually united by their own greed. And that's why they so reliably show up and vote each time. That's why the party of personal greed has lasted for as long as it has. The Tory party is built on pure selfishness. So what's changed now? What's shifted since the last election? And is there any chance of them avoiding what looks like an extinction level event? And well, why should we care anyway? Right, so 2 by-elections in different parts of the country, both Tory safe seats, both lost to Labour, and the reason being people stayed at home. I went into this in my analysis video last Friday. I'm not going to repeat the results again here. But we have this party that has existed since 1832, built on greed, driven by selfishness, losing seats that never change hands by and large. Tamworth was originally Labour when it was created in 1997, but it was lost by Gordon Brown and has become an ever-increasingly safe Tory seat ever since. Mid-Bedfordshire, however, has existed since 1918, and aside from the old Liberal Party winning back in the 1920s, it has been solidly Tory right up to this point. Greed and having a self-serving nature is no longer enough to get the Tory vote out, it seems. Though, of course, a by-election protest vote is not the same as staying at home en masse for a general election when the party who forms the next government is at stake. Yet still the Tories are despairing over these results, and well, they might. If their voters are choosing to stay at home rather than endorse what that party has become, then there's no longer any such thing as a safe Tory seat. We've already seen some 50-odd Tory MPs announce they are stepping down ahead of the next election. The most recent, apparently set to quit, is current Chancellor Jeremy Hunt. Things now looking so ropey for him in Surrey. I'll repeat that again, Surrey. Leafy, ever so reliably Tory voting Surrey. Stockbroker belt country Surrey. Enough emphasis now? So ropey for him in Surrey that he's expected to announce he's stepping down, unable to face the prospect of losing his seat publicly, avoiding a Portillo moment. The natural place to look to apportion blame for this is, of course, obviously, current leader Rishi Sunak, who is a completely wet behind the ears embarrassment, an utterly useless weakling, completely owned by the hard right of his own party, who are very much in the driving seat policy-wise, pushing culture wars as the only thing they have left to offer. But as useless as he is, he's not the one totally at fault for the Tories' ailing fortunes. You have to go back to Boris Johnson. You have to say Partygate did huge damage to the Tories as rule breach after rule breach came to light. The fines, the determination that the rules seemingly worked for him, the arrogance, and then the them and us attitude he promoted rubbed huge numbers of people up the wrong way. And of course, as more information comes out from the investigation into what was going on in government at that time continues and will continue until 2026, the damage is consistently ongoing. The latest example of this being Johnson's apparent belief that long COVID was akin to Gulf War syndrome insofar as he didn't believe in it, and that he apparently deliberately ignored lockdown advice as opposed to always following the advice as we were told they were doing back in autumn of 2020, so that medical experts believe that if he had listened to them, if he had taken the advice, we could have avoided some 25,000 deaths. We couldn't avoid all deaths, but certainly we could have saved a heck of a lot. 25,000 people, that's a lot of people. That's criminal. More will come out. And then, of course, there was Liz Truss, whose unfunded tax cuts crashed the economy, resulting in her being the shortest tenured Prime Minister in history, outlasted by a lettuce. But she's still around too, still causing damage to the Tory brand, since not only is she still allowed to stand as a Tory candidate, such as Sunak's weakness in permitting such a disastrous candidate to stand to be an MP again next time around, but she's still in complete denial what she did was wrong, and she's still agitating for more tax cuts. She's never apologised, she never will, and is a walking, talking example of just how awful the Tory party is now. Sunak inherited that fallout, two absolute headbangers, and so he did what you might have thought would be the sensible thing and portrayed himself as Mr. Strong and Stable, Mr. I won't rock the boat, Mr. Safe Pair of Hands, Mr. Transparency, Mr. Reliable, Mr. Economically Credible, and all of that. He then rapidly proved he wasn't that at all. For one, nobody elected him to his position, not even Tory party members. He got crowned by the parliamentary Tory party, which put members off him rapidly, especially since he'd already lost to Liz Truss once. He also proved to be incredibly weak and not transparent at all, with scandal after scandal being laid before him, as he failed to suspend Nadeem Zahawi despite his erroneous tax affairs, and likewise with Dominic Raab and the bullying allegations made against him. Raab is stepping down at the next election too, but not Zahawi. He's been selected to stand for Stratford once again. So what discipline and punishment is ever shown on the Tory ranks by Sunak? None. He's totally owned by the hard right, without whose support he cannot carry on. And that's why someone like Suella Braverman is the main example, in my opinion, remain in post, despite all they've said and done, from wanting to x-ray migrants to check they're really children, to denying pregnant women the £3 a week extra by way of nutrition that they needed, to all the stop the boats rhetoric, to the Rwanda deportations, to putting asylum seekers on disease-riddled prison barges, and she just carries on. Most people, and a lot of Tory voters too, I'm counting in this, are disgusted by it. It's not strong, safe hands leadership. It's racist hatred of minorities to win points from a rump of truly disgusting individuals within our party. By becoming ever more extreme, the Tories are making themselves more unelectable and unsupportable. Far from being Mr. Stability, Sunak has tried to be Mr. Change too, which, when he has no mandate whatsoever to do that, has also upset people, annoyed members of his party, pissed off the base. He had no mandate for his 5 pledges he decided to nail his colours to, nor any real power to achieving them. Halving inflation by the end of this year was criticised because it was likely to happen anyway. It's now stalled this last month on 6.7%, making it look more uncertain and making it look like it's his fault. But headline inflation is meaningless when meaningful inflation, such as that on food, remains stubbornly high, and higher than that headline figure, currently sitting at 12.2%. And even when inflation drops, that isn't a drop in prices anyway, it's just a reduction in how much they're rising by. So drawing attention to something which is only ever going to be a price increase, unless it goes negative, is probably not the win Sunak the banker keeps thinking it is. NHS waiting lists remain too high and can't possibly fall fast enough to benefit him before the next election, not that he's doing much meaningfully to deal with that either. The national debt is another meaningless target to most people and isn't really a debt anyway, just a measure of how much cash is in the system. The economy has barely avoided recession, and stopping the boats won't ever happen until and unless a safe asylum route is created, which no main party will commit to. Sunak said, "I'll change stuff, I'll fix stuff," and has just shown himself to be the latest Tory leader to fail at doing that. People won't keep voting for failures. It's not just the fact he's unelected and has no mandate that is done for Sunak, from £2 million of government investment which has been shown to benefit his wife's business interest, to government contracts to Infosys, his wife's family firm, which he benefits from to the tune of millions every year, to announcing new drilling licenses open to companies which Infosys has contracts with, making every government decision a question of how exactly is Sunak going to personally benefit from this one. A country run in his family's interest is how many people perceive this guy. So is it really any wonder people are not turning out for this party of abject failure, of high taxation on those who can't afford to be taxed, because they'll never tax the rich, who they should be taxing, when they're led by a guy who is literally one of the richest men in the country? A literal example of the 1% telling the 99% he knows what is best for them. Get rid of him for someone else. Well, sure, let's do that. But who? Who on those Tory benches right now could make a difference? Would it make a difference anyway when the recent historical damage the Tories have done to the country both economically and during the pandemic, which Sunak is also implicated in, fined as he was during Partygate, Eat Out to Help Out, which was his idea, also shown to be a massive spreader event, and which led to the now Chief Scientific Advisor Angela McLean, at the time, referring to Sunak as Dr. Death, knowing the harm it would cause to lives, but which Sunak disregarded, his only concern being the economy. A dangerous, callous little weakling who, whilst he was losing these most recent by-elections when his voters were staying at home, he was in Israel telling Benjamin Netanyahu, the chief occupier of Palestine, that he hoped he'd win and that Britain was with him, even after he'd been found to have deliberately targeted a fucking hospital. Well, no, not in my name you don't support him. Tory voters aren't turning out for the Tory party because even they, like the rest of us, are sick and tired of them. They now face an extinction-level general election because of that very simple fact. And I can't see how anything can change that now. For all we know, Keir Starmer's Labour vote will fall as well, as people are unenthused and disgusted by him in turn, yet could still end up winning a general election landslide regardless of that, simply because people hate the Tories more. UK politics, I don't think, has ever looked more bleak and depressing in my lifetime. We can only hope something better comes out of it, though, with Reform UK seemingly waiting in the wings to suck up disaffected Tories, not realising they're even more right-wing and even more dangerous. Things could conceivably become even worse. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where I dug into those two most recent by-elections in the past week. There could be more to come yet too, and I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Keir Starmer is continuing to cause ire in the Labour Party ranks by clamping down on the free speech and freedom of expression of Labour elected officials, along with ordinary members if they get caught, by saying there will be consequences for attending any pro-Palestine rallies. If caught, likely resulting in suspension and a probable expulsion, judging by the heavy-handedness of his regime on party discipline, as we've been seeing for years. Of course, this has appalled and disgusted many who have resigned from the party as a direct consequence of this diktat of Starmer taking the side of Israel, Zionist without qualifications such that he is. Of course, he has tried to backpedal on that somewhat, denying that he ever advocated for war crimes against Palestine, despite us all hearing it on a radio interview. But the one thing he never rode back on was that ban on Labour officials attending those demonstrations for Palestine. He hasn't budged an inch there. And what will cause even more hell up now is the news that at a pro-Israel rally, not only was an elected official allowed to go, but an actual shadow minister not only went, but was a speaker at the event. If Starmer wants to give the impression he gives the slightest whiff of a shit about Palestine, he's failing utterly. Right, so the diktat. Nobody is allowed to go to a Palestine demonstration or else. So said the letter from Starmer's miserable sidekick and Labour General Secretary, David Evans. And the main sentence to take away from that was, there will be a number of protests and demonstrations taking place over the weekend. Elected representatives have been given strong advice not to attend any of these events. Of course, a great many went anyway. People in their thousands protesting in London, Liverpool, Glasgow and everywhere else as well. Many more places. Many will have been Labour members, certainly at the very least. And certainly a now ousted Labour MP, though no less a representative of the movement in Jeremy Corbyn, was a speaker for Palestine, and as always, he gave it the beans, particularly taking aim at Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden for their complete acquiescence to one side of this conflict when you don't achieve peace by saying you want one side to win. Both UK and US leaders have been utterly obnoxious idiots about this. Starmer is equally as bad, though, if not worse on this matter, as many of his own councillors and council leaders, those who haven't resigned in disgust at him yet, have complained, many with large Muslim communities. How can we show support for these communities with these people who come out and vote for us if you won't let us support them? And others taking a more hardline tone towards the party leader, demanding he start showing some sympathy towards Palestinians as well. Well, if they had money to lobby him like Israel seemed to do, if they had funded his leadership campaign like Israel lobbyists did, perhaps he would. Everything to do with Starmer seems to come with a price tag, and if you can afford him, well, he'll pretty much back whatever policy you like. If you don't like this position, he has plenty of others and faces to match. Same with principles. But that's the impression his 4 years as Labour leader have left us, left the country. And that's certainly the impression it's given me. Leicester Council leader Peter Salisbury, for example, let's go up to Leicester. Leicester has a huge Muslim presence. He said to Starmer, "I have no doubt at all that you and the party have been entirely right to condemn the brutal terrorist attacks in Israel emanating from Hamas in Gaza. However, the impression that has been given is that this condemnation of recent events extends to approving uncritically the Israeli government's response and of ignoring the decades of injustice and the oppression of Palestinians and the violations of their human rights. Muslim councillors are under enormous pressure from their communities who support Labour values." Can't argue with that. He's absolutely right. He's bang on the money. Another critic of Keir Starmer over this banning of Palestinian demonstration, though, has been Tory peer Sayeeda Varsi. Of course, she's having a go at Labour, you might be thinking, who hasn't singled out, but she hasn't just singled out Labour in this, it should be said. She's picked on her own party as well. But as far as Labour goes, she says the Labour Party too, after years of taking that vote for granted, having received over 80% of the Muslim vote, found itself failing to respond to anti-Muslim racism being experienced by its members. Once again, Muslims are the most targeted religious group. And again, she's right. And a further 72 councillors are apparently now under pressure to resign from the Labour Party by their Muslim communities, by their constituents, because Starmer is not listening to them. This is a problem he is making worse through ignorance, through denial, through other ministers making excuses for him. But the damage being done by saying to elected officials, do not go to pro-Palestine rallies, do not stand with your Muslim communities, is appalling, and it's not going to go away. Somehow, he has managed to still make things even worse for himself. He's got a talent for it. You see, it isn't just pro-Palestine demonstrations happening. There are pro-Israel ones too. They are less reported. They're a damn sight smaller on the whole, but they're notable because attendance of these are not banned by Starmer and Labour. He has no problem with people standing with Israel and demonstrating for Israel. He has that problem with Palestine. And as if to make that abundantly clear to even the hardest-headed Labour members still hanging in there, thinking Hamas are the reason Starmer won't publicly support Palestinians, when Hamas are not most Palestinians. Do educate yourselves on that. Do get that point across. But to put it beyond doubt that Starmer, just like Sunak and Biden and von der Leyen and too many other world leaders, has taken a side, make no bones about it. Not only are Labour officials allowed to attend these events, but at a large one in London held over the weekend, not only was a Labour official there, but a member of Starmer's shadow cabinet was there. A shadow minister, no less. But not only were they there, they were actually one of the speakers at the event. Jonathan Reynolds, the shadow international trade secretary, was there, addressing the crowd along with Michael Gove representing the Tories. So sides are very much taken here on both sides of the House by both main parties, and the side they're both taking is with Israel. Reynolds curiously has drawn no attention to this event himself on his own Twitter timeline at all, though he was more than happy to share Starmer meeting Muslim community members in South Wales. So quite the two-faced game at play there. I've got a video coming on that South Wales meeting, incidentally. There's hell up about that as well. I'll come on to that in another video. Shame somebody in the crowd, though, had a camera and shared a pic of Reynolds speaking. Otherwise, we'd never know about it, though. Certainly, no media are covering this at all. The general public, we ordinary working class folk, having to be our own media again. Now, as much as the hypocrisy of the Starmer regime here has been exposed yet again for being two-faced as all get out, the Israel demo, it does have to be said, was called not in support of the Netanyahu regime or anything of that ilk, but to call for the release of hostages taken by Hamas. And I absolutely agree with that sentiment. And I think that's something they should be perfectly entitled to demonstrate about, as much as I stand by the Palestinian people and their oppression and the apartheid they live under. That is the doing of successive Israeli governments. And as much as some Israeli citizens, notably the settlers' attitudes go and how offensive they can be, how disgustingly they talk about Palestinians as not even being a thing or being regarded as subhuman, most Israeli people do not think like that. And I'd prefer to think those taken hostage and the families affected are like the majority of Israelis who just want peace. Polling there currently suggests some 80% of Israelis blame Benjamin Netanyahu for everything that is going on right now. So the people there cannot all be bad, cannot all be fooled by what is going on, and nobody deserves to have their family members taken at all, regardless of who they are or what they believe in. That isn't to say that some of the rally were not Zionists, because of course some were. We're not there to just declare they're taking a side, much like our media and like our government officials are. There were people there holding up signs that were quite offensive, but they were in the minority. Fundamentally here, though, Keir Starmer, by allowing Jonathan Reynolds to address this crowd at a pro-Israel event, has shown whose side he is on and whose side he is not on, what he stands for and what he doesn't. He's taken the side of the oppressor against the oppressed, the side of apartheid and not equality, the side of Israel and not Palestine. He is not on the side of Muslim communities. He's on the side of the Zionist and the colonizer. He's on the side of the powerful, not the powerless. So what kind of a leader would he make for the UK? Not one for the many and one not for the few. That's for the brave and sure. This latest show of hypocrisy he's exposing so that he or other Labour figures will get questioned by it, because they need to be. They need to be hammered on this right now. We're seeing the knock-on effects of these discussions from a video or a tweet. It'll get picked up by constituents, by councillors. The questions come. It escalates up the line until the questions get asked. Why did a shadow minister attend a pro-Israel event when they are banned from attending pro-Palestine ones? And when that gets asked on a mainstream news outlet, like LBC, for example, then we'll know the message has got through. Start asking that question of your representatives. Share this video. We deserve answers. I really want to see how Starmer tries to wriggle out of this one, because I can't see how in hell he can. And for many councillors hanging in there still, debating whether or not to go, surely this ought to be the last straw for a few of you now. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on the story in the comments below too and be part of the conversation. Are you disgusted by this or entirely not surprised? Let me know your thoughts. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Keir Starmer over this past weekend was once more put on the spot to just say sorry for backing war crimes against Palestinians, for backing the withdrawal of power and water by Israel, and he instead just flat out denied he ever said such a thing. What an absolute weasel of a man he is. And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Keir Starmer has been in South Wales over the last few days doing the showing his face thing ahead of a none too distant future general election. He's been at Port Talbot Steelworks to talk about the future of steel under a future Labour government, green steel, all of that, but one other notable trip was to the South Wales Islamic Centre, a blatant attempt to appear to be on the side of Muslims, and certainly the pictures published by him implied they were very pleased to see him. So much so, in fact, that they felt it necessary to issue some context to that visit afterwards, in light of Starmer's blatant taking of sides in this most recent conflict and the decades-long oppression of Palestinians by Israel, and what really happened when he met some of them. Right, so Keir Starmer, whilst in Wales on his little flesh-pressing exercise, went to visit the South Wales Islamic Centre to meet with the Muslim community there, and given everything he has said publicly over the last week or so, from saying Israel has a right to withdraw water and power from Gaza, thereby advocating for a war crime to be committed, before backpedaling on it, saying he didn't mean that, to flat out denying he ever said it, so very much despite the LBC clip of him saying it still widely being circulated under the heading, "This is how much of a liar Keir Starmer is, watch with your own eyes, listen with your own ears." This was very much an obvious attempt at placating Muslims to whom great offence has been caused by him and his party up and down this country, and certainly not helped at all by his ban on showing solidarity with Palestinians and with Muslims at demos, whilst he clearly consented for one of his shadow ministers to address a pro-Israel rally, as covered in my last video. But here was a clear attempt to try and gain back some of the lost ground, see off any more councillor resignations, or worse potentially, and show he does care about the Muslim community, or rather, he cares about the political fallout he's created and is desperate to win back some brownie points. A tweet emerged with several glowing pickies from the event shaking hands, smiling faces, everyone looking very happy, very pleased to see Starmer, with Starmer's accompanying text reading, "I was grateful to hear from the Muslim community of the South Wales Islamic Centre. I repeated our calls for all hostages to be released, more humanitarian aid to enter Gaza, for the water and power to be switched back on, and a renewed focus on the two-state solution." Now even this, he's managed to screw up though. He's given the impression there that he's gone to South Wales, he's spoken to some Muslims, and he's demanded they hand over the Hamas hostages. That's how it comes across. It's horribly badly phrased. It says nothing about what he might actually have spoken to them about, because clearly these people in South Wales do not hold Israeli hostages. From what I've been told, the community there in Cardiff are mainly, though I dare say not exclusively, are of Yemeni heritage. So seemingly he's not even addressed Palestinians here, not in the main at least. It's triggered a rather angry phone call into LBC, and the recipient of said call happened to be Starmer's chief minion, Wes Streeting. Oh, couldn't have happened to a nicer fella. Who was asked? "We as a Muslim community strongly feel that it's very one-sided. The media is biased and the politicians are biased. Keir Starmer, your leader, he went to Wales yesterday, and his tweet then says, 'I spoke to the community and I told them all hostages need to be released.' Why is that the Muslim community's fault? That's just Islamophobia. How is that acceptable? When you put something like that out in public, it damages relationships. The Muslim community is demonized and everyone says the Muslim community needs to do more. What about your leader, who's fueling this kind of division? It's not helpful. What do you have to say about that, Wes?" Well, exactly. It was another stupidly ill-thought-out comment from a man woefully out of his depth, who can't even pretend to be looking at this from both sides without putting his foot right in it. Well, Wesley tried to make out that Starmer was actually saying the complete opposite in the tweet, and then went into full damage limitation exercise mode by referring to other things Starmer had said at different places. But that is besides the point, Wes. He has caused offence, and you're trying to make out that the Muslim community are misunderstanding him here is insulting to them as well. The one thing Streeting said that I did agree with, though, was when he said it was not for Muslims here to apologise for or be held accountable for the actions of Hamas. That is completely right, not to mention should be bloody obvious. So when can we expect you to tell Starmer to take his tweet down and rephrase it then? That'll be the 8th of never, I expect. It wasn't only Muslims around the country ringing in about the offence caused here. The chap at LBC sounded like he was from the Midlands to my ear, but frankly he could have come from anywhere in the country. It shouldn't have mattered. That tweet will have caused further offence. Jay, for example, on Twitter said, "Why is Starmer telling South Wales Muslims to release hostages?" Samaya on Twitter said, "I could pull my teeth out in frustration. Who in South Wales Mosque is responsible for releasing hostages?" Black Lives Matter UK said, "Are hostages being held in South Wales Islamic Centre? Would Starmer have made similar statements about ending the siege in a synagogue? This is just wildly Islamophobic, and he is bragging about it." Mark Hebden said, "Can someone tell me why Keir Starmer demanded hostages be released to worshippers at the South Wales Islamic Centre? Does he think they hold some sway over Hamas, or is he just being racist and assigning responsibility for terrorism to the wider Muslim community?" And on it goes. Lots and lots of quote tweets. It's not gone very well for him. Aside from anything else, though, the South Wales Islamic Centre itself have felt the need to issue a statement following all of that, which says, clarification from the South Wales Islamic Centre regarding Keir Starmer's visit. Firstly, may Allah reward you all for your gira, zeal, and support for our people in Palestine. Secondly, it is best to face those whom we disagree with and show them the truth. What he, Starmer, mentioned recently is totally wrong and has offended us Muslims, which is totally unacceptable. Facing him is better than avoiding him. We raised our complaints and we criticised him for what he said. We told him that we reject this statement and that we do not agree with what he said, and that he is completely wrong, and what is happening to our people in Gaza contradicts the most basic rules of human rights. We asked him to put pressure on the government to allow humanitarian aid to enter for the people of Gaza and to stop these massacres which are happening in Gaza. We would like to make it clear that the Islamic Centre in Cardiff is fully supportive of our brothers in Palestine. All of our khutbah revolved around this topic, and we participated in the protests and supported them, and donations were collected over the past 2 weeks for their benefit. We also held a charity event that was entirely for the benefit of Palestine. We pray for their long-deserved freedom. So they had actually called Starmer out over his appalling and still not apologised for or retracted statement regarding the committing of war crimes by Israel in the form of withholding water and power. Funny that Starmer decided not to mention that, eh? He hasn't mentioned it since either, as instead of deleting his offensive tweet, He thought to add further context to it instead, like we needed more explanation to get where he was coming from, because of course he can't possibly ever be wrong. He said in his follow-up, and these came more than 24 hours after the original tweet, that I was questioned by members and I was deeply moved to hear their pain and horror at the suffering of civilians in Gaza. I made it clear it is not and has never been my view that Israel had the right to cut off water, food, fuel or medicines. International law must be followed. So he's still trying to deny he said what we all heard him say, even in the face of massive criticism and a response from the people he visited, who are also not fools, who know what he said, told him of the offence caused, and still he opts to pretend he didn't say it, to lie, but do the decent thing and just say sorry. I do expect more resignations to follow, and for God's sake, will someone get Starmer on an Islamophobia awareness course, because he sorely needs it. If this was Corbyn, we'd be seeing back-to-back news coverage with half-hour bulletins on it that we aren't, shows the media, as the extremely eloquent LBC caller made a point of saying as well, are just as Islamophobic and selective in what they choose to put out as news and what they choose to withhold. There's one final, very important point I want to make here as well. I've been made aware of as I've been writing this rant, and that was that the South Wales Islamic Centre has been on the receiving end of a lot of angry phone calls because of the fact that they met Starmer. And so some important context surrounding the nature of the visit has come out, courtesy of one of the imams there. The excerpts that I've had passed on to me, just as I was writing this, as I said, read, South Wales Islamic Centre did not invite Keir Starmer. He was in Wales and his people made a phone call to South Wales Islamic Centre expressing their desire to come and visit the centre. The imam did not know who Keir Starmer was before he met him at the South Wales Islamic Centre. He's Egyptian, can barely speak or read English, and doesn't follow local politics. He was also not aware of what Keir Starmer had said in support of genocide and war crimes. He wishes he had researched online before he agreed to meet him. Even if he had, he doubted that he would have found anything in Arabic, though. The imam was unaware that this visit would be exploited for propaganda and public relations. He was shocked when the angry phone calls started coming in from various communities, and disappointed to see how the pictures from the visit were being used by Keir Starmer on social media for propaganda purposes. He will ask the mosque committee to meet and draft another statement to clarify what happened and state South Wales Islamic Centre's position. And he cried as he explained that he would never betray Palestinians by associating or collaborating in the propaganda of anyone who supports war crimes and genocide against them. Keir Starmer, folks. No depths he won't sink to clear his name, as long as it doesn't involve an apology. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this in the comments below and be part of the conversation here. Seems to me the story is not going to be one that is going to go away anytime soon. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Starmer's issues on equalities continue to be a source of great shame on the Labour Party. He even recently managed to outdo Suella Braverman on the topic of LGBTQ plus rights. I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so the fallout from Keir Starmer's appalling conduct over the last week in relation to the Muslim communities, in relation to Islamophobia, in relation to his opinions over what Israel has a right to do concerning Palestine isn't going away. If anything, it seems to be worsening. From advocating for war crimes to be committed by Israel in regards to withdrawing water and power from Gaza and quickly realising people didn't like that, funnily enough, some of us are actually human and all, resulting in him doing a little bit of backpedaling, while still refusing to retract what he said, of course, or apologise, because that appears to be completely beneath him. As if that wasn't bad enough, though, instead of apologising, he then set up a spur-of-the-moment meeting with the South Wales Islamic Centre whilst on a trip to Wales, unplanned as we've subsequently found out, where he claimed in his own tweet to have gone there and demanded the release of Hamas hostages because somehow an Egyptian imam and the Muslim community of Cardiff are somehow responsible for that. Or is it just all Muslims, Keir? Either way, he completely misrepresented his visit there to use them as political capital, and he's been caught out for that as well. The words, "I'm sorry," still have not crossed his lips, though, and the damage is increasing. This is spiralling from what was an appalling incident into a full-blown party crisis, and still it appears Starmer is set on damage limitation rather than acknowledging he himself was in any way at fault. Right, so things are getting progressively worse for Keir Starmer in light of this Islamophobia crisis in his party that he and they are currently embroiled in, a crisis he himself is chiefly responsible for. And if he truly believed in taking responsibility for his own actions, he could probably have avoided all of this by now. But he doesn't. The man's arrogance is astonishing in light of what he's been caught out with here. From saying Israel has the right to stop water and power going into the concentration camp known as the Gaza Strip, to rowing back on that as something he didn't mean, to flat out denying he ever said it. Starmer's reputation was looking ropey at best, not least because he was supposedly a human rights lawyer and ought to have known all about this. Should be his specialism, his forte. But what has made things even worse since was his little stunt at the South Wales Islamic Centre, where he put out a tweet and pictures showing a good-natured meeting between himself and the Muslim community there. That's how he wanted it to appear. Only for Starmer to have actually ended up undermining all of that by claiming he went there and said he demanded the Israeli hostages being held by Hamas be released, which clearly isn't the responsibility of people in South Wales, and clearly isn't the responsibility of all Muslim people, equally as bad as, say, for example, tarring all Jewish people with the crimes being committed by Netanyahu and his forces in Israel. It was racist, it was Islamophobic, he has caused massive distress to the South Wales Islamic Centre, not least to the Egyptian imam personally who welcomed him, who was completely unaware of Starmer's genocidal comments regarding water and power supplies to Gaza, but also could barely speak a word of English, and certainly couldn't read it, so Starmer pulled a fast one. I've covered much of this in other videos, so I won't repeat this any further except to say that Islamic Centre issued a response at the time and promised another response was forthcoming in light of what Starmer had done, and here is what that second statement says, published by the Muslim Council of Wales. We at the South Wales Islamic Centre would like to clarify our stance considering the recent visit from Keir Starmer, leader of the opposition and Labour Party. We acknowledge the serious concerns raised by our communities, and we thank you for holding us to account. We fully understand and share the anger many in the Muslim community are feeling, both here in Wales and across the UK. We apologise for the hurt and confusion that our hosting of this visit caused. Our strength is in our unity, and we are aware that this visit has weakened and undermined that unity. As one of Wales's oldest mosques, we have a rich tradition of positive engagement with politicians and community leaders. Our intention was to raise the concerns of the Muslim community around the suffering of Palestinians, and so we hosted an event, initially with local representatives, on the issue, and the knowledge of the attendance of Keir Starmer was given at short notice. There was a robust and frank discussion which reflected the sentiments Muslim communities are feeling at this time. Members of the community directly challenged Keir on his statements made on the Israeli government's right to cut food, electricity and water to Gaza, warranting war crimes as well as his failure to call for an immediate ceasefire. We recognise that while our intention was to raise the issue of suffering of Palestinians, regrettably the outcome has put the South Wales Islamic Centre and the wider Muslim community into disrepute. We express our dismay at Keir Starmer's social media post which reads, I was grateful to hear from the Muslim community at the South Wales Islamic Centre. I repeated our calls for all hostages to be released, more humanitarian aid to enter Gaza, for the water and power to be switched back on, and a renewed focus on the two-state solution. We wish to stress Keir Starmer's social media post and images gravely misrepresented our congregants and the nature of the visit. We affirm unequivocally the need for a free Palestine. We implore all those with political authority to uphold international law and end the occupation of Palestine. A strongly and certainly very diplomatically worded statement there, utterly damning of Starmer, who it would seem only turned up at the last minute as an afterthought because he happened to be in the area at the time. And he used this community centre as political football to avoid an apology over his advocation of war crimes, be they have been intentional or not. Now he owes this Muslim community in Cardiff an apology too, but he just doesn't appear to like saying sorry. Well, this crisis Starmer has made for himself and the hole he keeps digging ever deeper is intensifying as today the mainstream breakfast news programmes have picked up the story. BBC Breakfast and Good Morning Britain have both run stories saying Starmer and Angela Rayner, so she's now been pulled into this, will be meeting with Muslim MPs today, hasn't happened at time of writing, to try and find a way to put this story to bed. Now the answer is, of course, obvious, I would hope, and I'd hope those Muslim MPs tell him as much, and that is that he needs to stop fannying around and offer an apology. It's been 2 weeks since Starmer made those original war crime comments. He's left them hanging in the air, thinking it'd be politically expedient for him to do so, that people are either too scared of being called anti-Semites or too indoctrinated to oppose Israel in any way, and such a hardline stance played well with those right-wingers whose votes he wants. As much as I see Starmer as a political pygmy, he's not stupid. He's too well educated to not know what he's doing when he's doing it. And as much as he's out of touch with ordinary people up and down the country, as much as he's Tory light, with little sense he'd change much in power from what we have now, I can quite believe he thought this would play well. It didn't, because we're not all immoral like he appears to be. He's tried to row back. It hasn't worked. He's tried to avoid apologising over and over again. And when that comes, when that apology, I think, will inevitably have to come, it will sound more and more hollow the longer he takes to offer it. But offer it he must. If he continues to refuse to say sorry, the worse this is just going to get. And all the Islamophobia and other forms of racism he ignores or doesn't treat as seriously as anti-Semitism, as laid out in the Ford report, are all going to be brought back rapidly into light and into focus. What I can see actually happening is Starmer going in to talk to his Muslim MPs, not for ideas on how he can fix this situation, but he'll more likely be telling them to go out and fix it for him. I can't see Starmer backing down on this personally at any time soon, despite the need for that apology. I think he would probably regard it as a weakness if he offered it. And I think he's going to keep screwing this up as a result for a little while yet. If the Tories play this smart, there's signs they sniff an opportunity here. Sunak has just announced a doubling of the humanitarian aid package to Gaza from 10 to 20 million pounds. Still next to nothing in practice. But as an example, it is. They could make some capital out of this with communities that don't typically vote for them. But such is the grave offence Starmer has not just caused once but twice now to Muslim communities, which is only increasing with that lack of contrition on his part. Starmer could certainly lose their vote at the very least, but the Tories may make a concerted effort to try and win it over to them too. How successful that would be, I don't know. It wasn't that long ago Suella Braverman was accusing them all of being the drivers behind grooming gangs after all. The Tories are no more of a friend to Muslims than they are of anyone else, but Labour simply losing that vote in any meaningful way could cost them in the region of 30 seats. Such is the strength of the Muslim vote in some areas. Furthermore, Starmer is still getting it in the neck by local party representatives on this too, as resignations have continued. The large Muslim presence in Leicester, as an example, has also led to that entire city Labour group penning a letter to all party leaders, including Starmer, to call for both an immediate ceasefire and an end to collective punishment and an end to the blockade in Gaza. On top of that, today, more than 150 Muslim Labour councillors, numbers still growing, have penned a joint letter to Starmer and Rayner demanding they call for a ceasefire. So this is very much a strong narrative now being carried through, and it's something Labour would do well to consider. Why have they not called for a ceasefire? Well, I'm going to cover that in the next video. Thanks for watching this one, though. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share, and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. What do you think Starmer needs to do? Is there anything he can do to fix this? Do let me know. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Starmer met the people of the South Wales Islamic Centre. The detail and the backstory on that story and how he basically used them for political gain is right here, and I'll catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so for all the things any of our politicians here in the UK, in fact, any politicians in the West, it seems, are saying in regards to the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas, with innocent civilians being caught up in it on both sides, the one thing all of them are failing to call for is a ceasefire. Stopping the bloodshed immediately so that a way forward can be found. Warfare never solves anything at the end of the day, does it? All wars end when people finally get around a table and talk. And for as much as the atrocities by Hamas can and should be condemned, if Gaza wasn't basically an open-air concentration camp, things likely would never have escalated to this. Palestine must be free, after all. Right now, though, the Labour Party seems to be competing for who can possibly be the worst at framing this debate. They aren't calling for a ceasefire because apparently stopping the killing might kill off their chances of a general election win. Right, so this story regarding Labour and its apparent priorities, i.e. that winning the next general election is more important than calling for a ceasefire, has come from a Sky News interview with the eternally odious Kay Burley, she who recently misrepresented the Palestinian ambassador's words that some other Sky News anchor had to deliver an apology over for, and her interview this morning with Labour MP Darren Jones, He who was regularly seen at his best, holding dodgy business types to account as chair of the Business and Trade Select Committee, but who took a cabinet post from Starmer last month, ending all of that, now becoming Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and has sadly become another obedient Starmeroid drone as a result. Well, the topic of ceasefires came up when Bernie mentioned that Save the Children, the charity, were demanding a ceasefire. She asked him, should there be a ceasefire or not? Straightforward question, no beating about the bush there, was there? Trouble is, Jones had to give a political fudge of an answer for some reason. He said, well, to answer your question about Save the Children, I entirely empathise with their position, and I watched the news last night, children being affected by this, and it's clearly deeply sad, and you don't want any child to be in that situation, and I understand, therefore, why they are calling for that. All I'm saying is that on issues of ceasefire or other issues, there are proper diplomatic routes that need to be followed for those types of discussions to happen. It's not for MPs such as myself in TV interviews. Bernie cut him off at that point. She does like to interrupt, doesn't she? But fair play this time, her timing was fairly good. He really wasn't saying much, was he? Nobody wants to see kids hurt, do they? Well, of course we don't. Well, demand a ceasefire then, if that's the case. Proper diplomatic routes. Yeah, they happen when you put the guns and the rocket launchers down. Let's skip to that bit before more people, more kids, as Save the Children are quite obviously focused on, die. Bernie stopped Jones and pushed him by saying that you're representing Labour today, moving the conversation back onto his party. And this is reasonable redirection. Bernie could see he was going to play the we're in the opposition card, and Jones appeared to be ready for this. But his answer to Bernie's interruption was no less bonkers, and more so if he had seen it coming, because he, on the question of being Labour's representative on the show, Jones came back with, the Labour Party is a party preparing for government. We hope we might be in government next year. So what I say today, it could have implications for what a Labour government will have to do. So that's why I'm being very limited in what I'm saying to you today, because if we are to come into government next year, it will be for David Lammy, our Foreign Secretary, for our diplomatic service to have conversations in a proper and professional way. And politicians can say things very easily or share things on social media or in new studios that can have implications for that type of process. All I'm saying is I'm going to be handling this in a professional way. So, basically what you, Darren Jones, are saying is that because you might be in power next year, you can't call for a ceasefire now because it might have implications for you later. You seem to not be prepared to comment on what those implications might be. So I'll tell you what they are because I can guarantee them. And the answer is more people dead because politicians like you won't act now. This is one of those times where it literally does not matter who's in charge. The answer is the same, or should be the same, and that should be the promotion of a ceasefire, of ending the violence, of getting around the table to talk this out, because this situation has festered on and on for decades, for 75 years, Darren. And if you can't work out what the outcome by next year will be based on 75 years of history, then get out of politics. You aren't up to it. What is the hold-up? Is Starmer sticking his moistened finger in the air and still trying to work out which way the wind is blowing before making a decision on this? Is his devotion to Israel more in the context of this ceasefire conversation of ensuring the flow of arms from here to there continues? What kind of a party is Labour if it puts the potential of achieving power in this country a year down the line, maybe, ahead of stopping a humanitarian crisis which begins with a ceasefire here and now? What is wrong with them? How far the party has fallen under Starmer, where naked self-aggrandisement and ambition supersedes any semblance of basic humanity. How out of step is the party leadership against the feelings of pretty much it's got to be the vast majority of this country. Surely we're all better than this. Surely we all think we're better than this, that we demand a ceasefire, and that a ceasefire is not an unreasonable thing to ask. Did they not see all the protests going on in the streets in cities up and down this country the other day? I'm sure all of those people think the ceasefire is better than, oh, I wonder if Labour will get into power next year. We better wait till then. What am I thinking? They banned attendance of such things, Labour did, didn't they? Unless they were for Israel, of course. To their elected officials anyway. But speaking of elected officials within the Labour Party, they aren't happy about this lack of a ceasefire call. And amongst others, a letter to Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner demanding a ceasefire from some 150 Labour councillors nationwide, numbers still growing, all after 23 Labour councillors at time of writing around the country have already resigned. So that's a lot of potential resignees in waiting if the party doesn't shift on its ceasefire stance, isn't it? And the signs are, it won't be. I won't read out the whole letter, but the last paragraph is the most stinging of all, and it reads: "As Labour councillors elected to serve our constituents, the message we have been hearing repeatedly over the last 2 weeks is simple. People just want an end to the bloodshed and the loss of innocent life. No nation, people or community should have to endure collective punishment, and the same should be the case for the Palestinian people. We are also clear that hostages held captive must be returned to their families safely. Therefore, as Labour councillors, as members of the Muslim community, we urge the Labour Party to urgently adopt a position of calling for an immediate ceasefire, calling on the UK government and the international community to act upon this proposal to save innocent lives." So there's the conflict within the Labour Party. Some elected officials want to do the right thing. Unfortunately, the Red Tories actually in control of the whole show, in power at the very top, value power more. But that means more to them than saving lives does. The consistent lack of calls for a ceasefire shows there's no rules-based international order anymore. Anti-Semitism right now means supporting Palestinians, it seems. Starmer is lying himself into a political grave. Labour is still, even now, maintaining 100% support for Israel, and the media are providing cover for the lot of it. More resignations will come, I'm sure of it. At time of writing, there are reports of shadow cabinet resignations potentially on the way over this. Trouble is, this is a leadership that isn't listening to anyone but itself, and it doesn't seem to care either. Whether that changes as the situation continues to worsen remains to be seen. But in their minds, they have an election to win. They still believe you'll vote for them anyway, so they have no reason to change right now, no reason to care. Are you going to prove them right? Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this in the comments below and be part of the conversation too. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Israeli targets have included not just the well-known targeting of a church, which various media outlets are still trying to paint as having been Hamas, but also churches and mosques flattening northern Gaza in order to claim it for real estate later. Wouldn't be the first time they've done it, would it? Also a war crime though, incidentally, another reason to call for that ceasefire. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Keir Starmer met with some of his Muslim MPs yesterday, around a dozen of them, to try and find a way out of the massive hole he's dug for himself amongst the Muslim community for his blatant abuse of that Islamic centre in South Wales for his own ends, as well as his claim that Israel had a right to commit a war crime by withholding water and power from Gaza. Starmer has come across as someone supremely arrogant, despite the fallout his direct actions have caused, apparently to the point he's throwing man-baby-style tantrums over it, because presumably he can't pin the blame on someone else this time and sack them. But ultimately this meeting, with another apparently scheduled for today, was a tokenistic gesture, because the main thing coming out of that first meeting, to put everything else said in the shade, was that he apparently said he will not apologise for what he said on that question of withdrawing water and power from Gaza. He has rode back on it. He has pretended he never said it or didn't mean it, but he still said it. The words came from his lips, and he's made it clear that he won't be saying sorry as a result of that. And so the resignations continue. Right, so Keir Starmer, he won't apologise, and we now apparently know that as fact, as one of the few bits of news to come out of what was largely a pointless meeting between him and some of his Muslim MPs, because actually he hasn't shifted his own position at all. If anything, he's hardened his stance. He won't be apologising. Apparently, we now have confirmation of that. He won't apologise for saying Israel has the right to withhold water and power from Gaza in the name of defending herself, despite the fact that is, in and of itself, a war crime, to match the ongoing war crime Israel is already committing there by occupying the Palestinian state. But that is the side Starmer, along with much of the West, have put themselves on. And it's a lonely place where much of the public, as protests, demonstrations and demands are showing, they're not on the side of the British people, who are overwhelmingly, finally, seeing through the lies, seeing the reality of the situation in Palestine, the driver of all the violence we've seen now and for the last several decades, the last 75 years. And it's social media that's delivered that. Where the mass media has always before been able to dictate the narrative and influence the way people think, this time that has failed. And that's quite a big deal in and of itself. But back to the matter at hand. Needless to say, though, it's alternative media delivering the information on these developments, and much of this has come courtesy of the Tribune writer and industrial correspondent Taj Ali, who put out a tweet saying, I'm told Keir Starmer told Muslim Labour MPs at a meeting earlier today that he refuses to apologise for his remarks on LBC endorsing the collective punishment of Palestinians. One source, no movement on calling for a ceasefire, felt tokenistic and has made matters worse. Apparently Starmer told one Muslim Labour MP that the party are waiting for the US to call for a ceasefire before they endorse such a position. So not only will he not say sorry, but he's apparently waiting to take his cue from the US. What is it with this guy that he can't make decisions himself? He's not a leader, he's a puppet, and it seems being worn like a glove by the likes of Peter Mandelson isn't an exclusive thing. It seems Joe Biden is perfectly entitled to have a go as well. A US president leading a UK Labour leader by the nose, that's always ended well in the past, hasn't it? Needless to say, though, Starmer still felt he had to issue a statement saying nothing had changed. See if you can find anything new, because I can't, not really. It reads, "It's clear the amount of aid and essential utilities getting into Gaza is completely insufficient to meet the humanitarian emergency on the ground. That's why we have repeatedly said that aid, fuel, water, electricity and medicines must be urgently ramped up, both through what can come in through the Rafah crossing and through Israel turning back on the supplies it controls. It is incumbent on all parties to make sure that aid and utilities don't just get in, but reach those who need them. That's why we've said deliveries need to be regular, fast and safe. We welcome Secretary Blinken's comments last night, and we support humanitarian pauses. In the long term, there can only be a political solution to this crisis, which is why we need to restart the hard work of talks for a two-state solution of a viable Palestinian state alongside a safe and secure Israel." I hate the way that's twice in two statements now. He said viable Palestinian state. If Israel makes sure it is unviable, what would Starmer say then? Nothing, I'm sure. He won't apologise for the political damage he's done with his very one-sided comment favouring Israel over Palestine to the point he advocated a war crime. So if a political solution is to be found, please God, can we make sure that has nothing to do with Keir Starmer? He's clearly incapable. I noted the mention of US Secretary of State Antony Blinken in that too, just to underline the US tail is wagging the UK Labour Party dog, or whatever that saying is. This is a guy who, in Blinken incidentally, this is a guy who has demanded the Qatari government tone down Al Jazeera's reporting of what is going on in Israel and Gaza right now. Not dissimilarly to Starmer demanding the Hansard record of what is said and done in Parliament be amended to remove a comment by his MP, Florence Eshalomi, the Shadow Minister for Democracy, no less, oh the irony of this stunt, where she called for a humanitarian ceasefire. Starmer is literally against the word ceasefire completely, to the point he proactively wanted removal of any mention of it, and is now behind a humanitarian pause. That's the language now, humanitarian pause, which seems to amount to letting aid in as long as we don't stop people shooting and killing each other whilst we're at it. Idiocy. To demonstrate the idiocy of it, the Israel is now targeting Palestinian bakeries who have received flour to stop them being able to produce bread to actually feed people. That's the people Starmer is continuing to resolutely side with, of course, and stop them from shooting, because we don't want the shooting to stop. Apparently, it seems that's the message from the US and the UK. Well, the failure of Keir Starmer to meaningfully shift his position, to show some contrition to those he's offended, that has already seen 23 Labour councillors resign, that has already seen 150 Muslim councillors around the country sign an open letter demanding he call for an immediate ceasefire, as I've covered over the last several days, have continued. The 150 signatures has now grown to 250 signatures off the back of this latest failure, to show some semblance of humanity here and stop taking one side when both need to come together to find a peaceful resolution. He still hasn't even publicly acknowledged the hurt and damage he's done to the South Wales Islamic Centre either, incidentally. He got his photo op, and that's all that matters there, it seems. Resignations have continued as well, in fact. This one by Luton Councillor Wahid Akbar really does say it all. He wrote, "I've been a member of Labour Party for over 31 years. During this period, I held several positions in the Labour Party that include Chair of Luton North Constituency Party for over 10 years and Chair of Luton Campaign Forum, formerly known as Luton Borough Party, for 3 years. I have served as Labour Councillor for 24 years, and during this period I have served on the Council as Executive, Chair of several committees and Mayor of Luton in 2000-2001. I have decided to resign from the Labour Party due to Keir Starmer's stance on Palestine's crisis and his recent statement on the current situation. In fact, Keir Starmer has endorsed Israeli government actions unequivocally, i.e. siege of Gaza, cutting off power and water was appropriate. Keir Starmer said, I think that Israel does have that right. It is an ongoing situation. Obviously, everything should be done within international law, but I don't want to step away from the core principles that Israel has a right to defend herself. I think Keir Starmer's statement is very disturbing, and he has endorsed illegal actions of Israeli government. I cannot associate with the party whose leader is so biased and has no regard to human rights, as to date over 5,000 Palestinians in Gaza have been killed, of whom 62% are children and women. I condemn the acts of violence and the targeting of innocent civilians. I also condemn the crime of collective punishment that has led to the deliberate denial of basic human necessities such as food, water, electricity and medicines to an already desperate civilian population. I condemn Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party, for his statements on the current issue on Palestine. In fact, Keir Starmer is the worst leader of the Labour Party since I joined 31 years ago. I also urge my ex-colleagues and Labour councillors on Luton Council to speak up for human rights, justice and peace, as this is a time people need your help and support. That's scathing. And on top of that, there are apparently 4 shadow ministers on resignation watch now over all of this. Not necessarily Muslim ones either, such as the disgust and discomfort they have with their tantrum-throwing Zionist without qualification leader. I don't quite know what is taking more of them longer though. How many of them resigned on the hour every hour for fear of a socialist leader gaining traction, a guy who has been outspoken in his actual support for a two-state solution of late, compared to Starmer, the unapologetic war crime backer? Labour in opposition, you want to be opposing Tory positions, not be on exactly the same page as them, especially over something like this, because that is where we're at. That is where we are. The reason the fallout is so much worse in Labour is because the leadership acting like this is completely out of step with the membership. 89% of Labour members right now want a ceasefire, and Starmer won't even let the word stand on the parliamentary record, let alone listen to that. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of this conversation as well. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where the fallout from that Muslim community centre visit has continued to batter Starmer too. All he has to say is sorry and hold his hands up, but apparently that sort of behaviour is only for us mere mortals. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so the first proper measure of how badly Labour are being affected election-wise has come out courtesy of Muslim Census, a Muslim pollster who've often been used by various mainstream outlets from the BBC, ITV and Al Jazeera to assorted newspapers to gauge the shape of the vote amongst Muslim communities up and down the country. And they've done the research in light of everything going on in the Middle East right now and our politicians' responses to them. And what their latest polling amongst Muslims shows is a catastrophically bad picture for Labour, because of the damage Keir Starmer and his positioning on Israel and Palestine has done, for the political stunts he has pulled, and for his refusal to apologise. The damage done is costing Labour in terms of electability, in terms of retaining or losing seats in high Muslim demographic areas, and that could be the difference maker for them taking power at the next election or not. Keir Starmer appears to be a bigger liability to them now than ever before. Right, so the Muslim Census poll, let's not drag this one out too much longer. This was a poll of some 30,000 Muslims across 575 constituencies in the UK, so it's a massive poll even by typical polling standards. However, it is a snapshot poll conducted by filling out an online form, so caveats for likely not being as stringent as other polling data from other polling firms might be, the same checks and balances not being carried out. However, the result is so mind-blowingly bad for Labour that is kind of a moot point here. We're well beyond margins for error. The survey has found that Labour's vote amongst Muslims has fallen from 71% of the entire demographic at the time of the 2019 general election to today sitting at just 4.9%. Yeah, 4.9%. Keir Starmer's actions, for they cannot be attributed to anyone else in Labour. It's his refusal to act meaningfully to hold Israel to account. It is he who backed Israel committing war crimes. It is he who used an Islamic centre in Cardiff to score political points that have resulted in the almost universal wipeout of Labour's Muslim vote. Down 66 points. In effect, that translates to the loss of some 93% of their Muslim voters. That's a total of 1.5 million votes. And I'm reliably informed that that would translate in the loss of some 31 seats that Labour currently hold. 98% of respondents in this poll only had a negative view of both Labour and the Conservatives, and it's because of their stances in relation to the conflict going on in the Middle East between Israel and Gaza, and the Tories are down 8 points to just 1%. Incidentally, the Muslim vote has never been an overtly Tory supporting one, but they are down too. Sadly, the biggest winner in all of this is apathy, as those saying they wouldn't vote at all has now risen by 28 points. Those who would vote for an independent, though, has risen 21 points. Those who would vote for the Green Party, up 15 points. The Lib Dems are up 8 points and the SNP up 3 points. But you also have to bear in mind that aside from the Muslim vote itself, there are plenty of other Labour voters who will have been put off voting for the party on the basis of its attitudes towards both Israel and Palestine. As much as many will want the Tories out regardless of how bad the alternative might be, voting for someone leading a party who has advocated for war crimes to be committed and refuses to apologise for them, saying it is a red line of common decency, which of course it is. There are many people dismissing this poll because of how it's conducted, though. It's low quality, they're saying. It's a single issue. Brexit, anyone? I would respectfully say that, for one, you're insulting the entire Muslim demographic who took part in this, dismissing their concerns because, frankly, who else is asking them? And I would also point to the results and the number of respondents and challenge you to keep up that narrative when the results are as absolutely seismic as they are shown to be. Labour is at grave risk of losing a vote it has taken for granted, that Starmer has taken for granted, that they won't go anywhere else, and they're showing that actually they bloody well will. I'll come back to that red line analogy a moment, actually, because I'm not the only one to have used it recently. As one of those 23 now former Labour councillors, Oxford City Council's Shaista Aziz, said prior to Starmer meeting with his Muslim MPs yesterday, which turned out to be a complete waste of time, that I think one good thing that will come out today is that the sheer anger in communities across this country will be clearly articulated. They cannot say they didn't know. What the Labour Party cannot say anymore is that it is marching collectively. There is a lack of respect for us as well, which is why the level of anger and the level of deep hurt across communities is unprecedented. And I don't think the party machinery understands it, because they have no close proximity to our communities, right? They only go into our communities to ask for our votes at key times and to do their PR stunts. That's pretty damning. Also pretty accurate. And when you add on how gravely insulted Muslim communities around the UK must feel now, it's little wonder that vote has seemingly collapsed in the space of days, really. So, consequences. How can we read into how nervous some MPs will be in light of all of this, though? Well, there is an early day motion doing the rounds at the moment, driven by Labour MP Richard Burgon, one of the Socialist campaign group, calling for the protection of civilians in Gaza and Israel, and sponsored by other Labour MPs on the left as well, including John McDonnell and the sadly now deselected Beth Winter. And it's now been signed by 95 MPs in total, though notably not a single Liberal Democrat. They've decided to start their own early day motion, because this one's not good enough for them, apparently, even though they're asking for basically the same thing. Desperate for some press attention for themselves in all of this, presumably. What else do the Lib Dems really stand for? If I knew that, perhaps I'd do more videos on them, eh? The Burgham EDM, though, is the one worth paying attention to, though, as it currently has 31 signatories from Labour. That number's doing a lot of lifting in this video, isn't it? Openly in dissent against Starmer's position, though. Not that this is completely analogous, because it isn't, but an estimated 31 Labour seats are vulnerable because of their high Muslim populations, with some big names that ought perhaps to feel a bit nervous. Liam Byrne, he who left the note to the Tories in 2010 saying there was no money left, he's actually got the largest Muslim population by constituency of all MPs. According to the 2021 census, 62% of his Birmingham Hodge Hill constituency identifies Muslim. Other Labour figures in potentially big trouble because of this are Starmer's Secretary of State for Justice Shabana Mahmood, Motormouth Jess Phillips, Shadow Paymaster General Jonathan Ashworth. All have Muslim voting populations greater than 30%. Starmer is literally in the business of ending the careers of some of his own shadow cabinet here, or some of them on these numbers anyway. And why? Simply because he, as a human rights lawyer, lacks the moral fibre. He, as Yanis Varoufakis put it recently, is a shiver looking for a spine to run up to stand up for Muslims, whose votes here he takes for granted, and stand up for international law and knock back war crimes. Because that's not exactly a high bar for any human, is it? Let alone a former human rights barrister. And of course, whatever you think of that poll, and whatever you think of those numbers, and whether you dispute the methodology involved or not. By not shifting his position, by not facing up to the reality of the mess he's made for himself, things can and will only get worse for him. He's not going to be winning lost support back by doubling down. He's only going to keep losing more. And actually, it's time this began to reflect on those in that shadow cabinet right now, and others on the parliamentary benches, and those resignations from his shadow cabinet that haven't already begun, because they're tying their careers at this moment in time to his arrogance, to his ignorance, and to his unapologetic, insulting stupidity. What does that say of the rest of them? And as such, do they really deserve to keep their seats anyway if they're going to carry on the way they are? Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Do have your say on all of this in the comments below as well. Be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where all of this very much undermines the messaging coming out of Labour over the weekend that they're prioritising winning a general election over calling for peace in the Middle East. But if the Muslim vote is collapsing over Labour's lack of a call for a ceasefire and the lack of an apology to them for backing a war crime, one very much seems to depend on the other right now, doesn't it? Try convincing Labour's leadership of that right now, though, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so news came out in the last few days relating to the arrest on suspicion of rape and possession of controlled substances of Tory MP Crispin Blunt. Now, I'm not one for conspiracy theories. I like to see proof of such things, and he was interviewed some 3 weeks ago in relation to a similar matter, but I can't help but note the convenient timing, the coincidence of all of this in light of what is going on right now in Israel and Palestine. Blunt is one of those rare few parliamentarians who has come out as pro-Palestine, even rarer when you consider that he's a Tory. But not only that, of course, but as I discussed in a video the other day, Blunt also happens to be a director of the International Centre of Justice for Palestinians, the ICJP, who have in recent days, of course, issued notices of intention to prosecute to the likes of Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer for their strong support of one side of the Israel-Palestine conflict, and therefore acting not in accordance with seeking peace, but more egging their chosen side on. Right, so Crispin Blunt of the ICJP, the International Centre of Justice for Palestinians, has been arrested in connection with allegations of rape and possession of controlled substances. Now, the only information we'd been given up until that point was that Surrey police had made an arrest, so that narrowed down where the MP was from, and that it was a male in their 60s, which narrowed it down to a choice of just 3 MPs, as I had a look into this. But then in a rather unusual move, the accused actually announced that it was indeed they who had been arrested, as Reigate MP Crispin Blunt put out a post saying, "It has been reported that an MP was arrested yesterday," this was several days ago now, "in connection with an allegation of rape. I am confirming that MP was me. The fact of the arrest requires a formal notification of the Speaker and then my Chief Whip. I have now been interviewed twice in connection with this incident. The first time 3 weeks ago when I initially reported my concern over extortion. The second time was earlier this morning under caution following arrest. The arrest was unnecessary as I remain fully ready to cooperate fully with the investigation that I am confident will end without charge. I do not intend to say anything further on this matter until the police have completed their inquiries." Right, so he's fronted up that it's him instead of hiding behind the usual anonymity rules that MPs benefit from and tend to use in such circumstances. As we've seen, we've heard reports of this MP has been accused of doing this, that MP has been accused of doing that, but never do they end up getting named. And the clue as to why that is was there in Blunt's statement, that this followed a report made by him concerning extortion. In other words, was somebody trying to blackmail him, potentially over something he did not do, or did do that they didn't like? It's not exactly the actions of a guilty man to report the fact they've been blackmailed for something they did do, is it? Though the subsequent police involvement certainly doesn't rule out some truth to the matter. The investigation must, of course, be completed. It is not for us to comment one way or the other and risk prejudicing the case, though, of course, if it does turn out to be true, Blunt wouldn't be the first. But the timing of this, coming less than a week after Blunt was doing media rounds as a pro-Palestine advocate, as the ICJP director, or one of the directors, talking about the letters of intention to prosecute being sent to various political figures regarding their bias in the ongoing Israel-Gaza crisis, I can't help but ponder on the convenient timing of all of this. Sure, he was interviewed a few weeks ago, but he didn't suddenly become a pro-Palestine advocate last week, nor director of the ICJP. Besides, if you read his statement, that interview appears to be in relation to him reporting the alleged extortion attempt 3 weeks ago. That's what that conversation was about. That's what that interview was about, not anything else. It could all just be coincidence, but could it also be intentional? We don't know when this alleged crime occurred at this moment in time, and I'm reminded of how political parties do like to keep their MPs in line, particularly the Tory party, because I still remember an infamous leaked spreadsheet now from a couple of years ago now, wasn't it, with the names of various MPs on it and the dirt their party whips allegedly had on them to use to coerce MPs into voting and acting in a certain way, lest they might leak it into the public domain. Do the Tory whips have something on Blunt? Did they choose to flex that in light of the ICJP sending Sunak a warning notice? Alternatively, being a director of the ICJP, a Palestinian advocacy organisation, and also as a politician in a governing party that is overtly pro-Israel, would he have been on a watch list by others? Intelligence services, perhaps? Oh, we're going down a bit of a rabbit hole here now, aren't we? Let's not tunnel any deeper. Suffice to say, it is not unreasonable to assume, based on what we know about how political parties and establishment interests operate, that there might not be some kind of setup going on here in order to discredit a key figure saying and doing things the establishment don't like. Regardless of what you think of him as a Tory, not much if you're like me, but he is standing up for Palestinians who a few others seem prepared to, and is prepared to follow that through with legal action against his own government, no less. And you have to bear in mind, Blunt was one of those who backed Sunak, the leader. It's not like there's a personal axe to grind here, just standing up for international law in the face of our government, basically cheering on breaches of it. It should be noted, though, that Blunt is just one director of the ICJP. There are two, the other being a chap called Tayeb Ali. So this case against Blunt wouldn't necessarily stop them following through the legal action, such as Blunt outlined last week, that I spoke about in another video. The organisation would still function. Blunt also isn't the only MP involved with the ICJP, it should be noted as well, with Tory MP Alan Duncan and Lib Dem MP Layla Moran on its advisory board. However, with Blunt having been the public face, let's put it that way, targeting him could potentially be a way to discredit him and therefore the organisation by association. Well, what about Duncan and Moran, in which case? Have they been targeted too? As they are only connected in an advisory capacity, not on the list, so to speak, or are they? Who knows? Alan Duncan made an interesting mention of Israel in his memoirs, though as he claims in 2016 that the Conservative Friends of Israel blocked his appointment to be Minister for the Middle East on the basis of his own pro-Palestine sentiments. And of course he must be pro-Palestine too, to be on the advisory board of the ICJP. He wrote in his book that Israel thinks it controls the Foreign Office, and it does. Now that's a pretty terrifying sentence. It might explain why James Cleverly bends over backwards for the Israeli ambassador Zippy Hotovely, and if you haven't seen interviews of her on the telly, I suggest you don't if you have high blood pressure. But again, it adds to that niggling feeling that something is not right here, that Crispin Blunt announcing potential legal action against the government, who, if Alan Duncan is to be believed, control foreign policy, and then ending up embroiled in legal action of his own is too convenient. Absolutely, it must be investigated, as all crimes should be, and must be, especially if public figures are involved. If Blunt is guilty, he should face the consequences of that, obviously. But if it amounts to nothing, as he appears confident it will, and his own actions certainly seem to imply, by broadcasting to the world that it is him that's in the frame, the timing of this will look all the more suspicious. What do you think of this? A bit too convenient at this moment in time, or am I just being too much of a cynic? Let me know in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Blunt and the ICJP laid out their intentions, the backstory to this video if you like. And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so in order to diffuse conflict, the obvious thing to all of our minds surely is to get people from both sides around a table, get conversations and negotiations happening, laying weapons down so these things can happen, along with humanitarian aid getting through. Surely that should be the obvious thing to do here. This is all begins with a ceasefire, doesn't it? The killing has to stop so the conflict, in its current terms at least, as regards Israel and Palestine, can begin. Isn't it amazing how many world leaders aren't saying that, though? The US are on Israel's side, Biden hugging Netanyahu, Sunak saying we want you to win to Netanyahu, incredibly stupid man. Macron in France banning protests in favour of Palestine. which I'm sure only drove more of the French out to protest. And of course Keir Starmer flatly ruling out calling for a ceasefire, apparently because he's waiting for the US to do it first. Meanwhile, of course, he's still not apologising for actually giving the nod to Israel to commit war crimes. There are other parties here making the right call, though. The SNP want a ceasefire, the Green Party want a ceasefire, Plaid Cymru want a ceasefire, and now dissent in the Labour ranks is shattering Starmer's authority on this topic, unmovable as he continues to be. Others are speaking out regardless of him, however, and the latest might be the most damaging of all, as London Mayor Sadiq Khan has formally called for a ceasefire too. Right, so calls for a ceasefire. It's the common sense approach here, surely. It's where we start. Can we all agree on that? Stop any more people being killed, first and foremost. Yes, there is a poor track record of Israel listening to such things, but it's all on them if they break such terms, and with the world, and more importantly social media, putting them under the microscope right now, holding them to account for their actions of the last 75 years ongoing, finally, they won't get away with the usual media damage limitation that generally does the trick for them. Of course, political leaders siding with them constantly helps them too, but again, their messaging is falling on deaf ears as the truth comes out regardless. And one of those suffering more than most due to his acquiescence to the apartheid state of Israel is that Zionist without qualification Keir Starmer, whose diktat over Israel, whose dishonesty over his own comments, blatantly lying as he denies advocating for Israel to commit war crimes. We all heard him say it on LBC, and 29 Labour councillors at time of writing now quitting the party as a direct result of that comment and the refusal to retract it and apologise for it since, and now confirming he will not apologise at all, ruling it completely out as he has, the arrogant swine. But the cracks are showing, not just at local level, but at national level too. Labour MP Richard Bergen's early day motion calling for a ceasefire to protect civilians in Israel and Gaza has been signed by 95 MPs, 31 of whom are Labour. Labour MP Andy MacDonald this week has written a piece for the Tribune, also calling for a ceasefire. A frontbencher even, Imran Hussain, has done so now too by signing Bergen's EDM, leaving him in a potentially sackable position for moving away from this leadership's position on this. Though whether Starmer would have the nerve, in light of all the damage he's already done to himself, to sack Hussain over that remains to be seen. But the biggest smack in the teeth to Starmer's position of basically doing the same thing as Sunak's Tories are, ignoring calls for a ceasefire, rejecting it in favour of a nonsense called a humanitarian pause, where we'll let aid in, but we won't stop the shooting and killing, and if the aid gets hit, well, that's just naughty. It is insultingly weak and stupid, and the fact he called for it, the fact the call for it came from US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and our politicians just jumped on board, jumped to the same tune, really just goes to show how pathetic they all are. But the biggest smack in the teeth for Starmer is that London Mayor Sadiq Khan has now come out and called for a ceasefire as well. But he hasn't just put out a tweet about it. He hasn't written an article for some hack rag behind a paywall over it. He's recorded a full-throated on-video message that frankly leaves Starmer's pathetic responses and whatever passes for a reputation of his in ruins. Khan has said, "Many Londoners like me have watched in absolute horror at the death and suffering in Israel and Gaza. Londoners' family members killed, tortured and taken hostage. Lives changed forever, going through unimaginable trauma. The terrible situation in Gaza now looks set to deteriorate even further. Thousands of innocent civilians, men, women and children, have already been killed, and it is becoming impossible for aid to reach the people who desperately need it. Substantial military escalation is now likely, which will only deepen the humanitarian disaster. I join the international community in calling for a ceasefire. It would stop the killing and would allow vital aid supplies to reach those who need it in Gaza. It would also allow the international community more time to prevent a protracted conflict in the region and further devastating loss of life. Israel has a right to defend itself, to target those responsible for the appalling terror attack on the 7th of October, and to take action to free the hostages. The international community must redouble its efforts to get the hostages released, but a widespread military escalation will only deepen the humanitarian disaster. It will increase human suffering on both sides. No nation, including Israel, has the right to break international law. There can only ever be a political resolution to achieving peace. It can't simply be the escalation of military conflict and an ongoing cycle of death, pain and destruction." Now, I'm not a fan of Sadiq Khan. I never have been. If anything, he comes from the same sort of a faction as Keir Starmer himself does within the Labour Party. But he's got the tone and the messaging of his statement bang on. He's absolutely right and fully understands what is going on here. And I fully associate myself with what he has said. Where Khan talks in terms of Londoners, though, the message is the same for us all. We are watching in horror. We are shocked and upset and appalled at what we are witnessing. But we also know, as I said at the start, as Khan said in his video message, that we can only get this resolved by de-escalation, by a ceasefire. And those not calling for this basic, first step, common sense approach, which surely should be the same message regardless of the conflict, that if people are being killed, that has to end first and foremost, and let the international community, as Khan put it, mediate. Aid has to get in, and it's an idiot who calls for aid whilst not getting a ceasefire put in place, otherwise that aid ends up being targeted. It is being targeted and destroyed. It is being reported on. And what a waste that has been. There was also a quite direct and deliberate swipe at Starmer in that speech where Khan said, no nation, including Israel, has the right to break international law. The very thing Starmer backed in that now infamous radio interview that he has since denied saying and ruled out completely apologising for saying. It's blatantly obvious that he should. The longer he doesn't, just the more damage he's causing for himself. And of course the fact he won't apologise whatsoever exposes Starmer's utter bias in favour of apartheid Israel. The fact this speech of Khan's was addressed to Londoners is also harmful to Starmer in light of his rhetoric, since Starmer is of course a London MP. Still though, the messaging from Starmer's team isn't changing, and another London MP, Steve Reid, was out on the media rounds this morning too, confirming as much. Reid was asked if more Labour figures in light of those who had already called for a ceasefire would come out now and do so as well. And Reid's response to that was, I completely understand and empathise with colleagues who are seeing what is going on in Gaza and just feeling desperate. So many viewers will be looking at those scenes today and just feel anguish at the pain and suffering that is going on. But what I would say to colleagues is if this attack that Israel suffered had been on the UK, had been on the US, our state, the United States, our state would have sought to defend ourselves, to protect our citizens by dismantling the capabilities of the terrorist organisation that carried it out. That applies to Israel too, who have the right under international law to do that. So in other words, those calling for a ceasefire, well, you're wrong according to Reid and no doubt Starmer, because Israel, according to you, has the right to do what it has been doing up till now, which has been to blockade and bombard a besieged area, killing civilians, 70% of whom have been women and children. Is that what you're saying, Steve? That's the Labour Party official position, isn't it, Steve? Who could have guessed that Starmer and his front bench could end up with blood on their hands while still being in opposition? Truly are the heirs to Blair, aren't they? Israel has a right to defend herself. Sure, any country does. But that isn't what they're doing. They are blowing up hospitals, bakeries, churches, mosques, places of shelter, all in the name of going after Hamas. But in doing things the way they are, what chance have they got of recovering hostages alive? How can they possibly be avoiding them with the way they're conducting this action? They can't be. So what is their real objective here? Levelling the north of Gaza for further occupation? Well, here's a newsflash, Mr. International Law Steve Reid. That's a war crime too. Sadiq Khan, for all his faults, and he has many, has sent out a message that Starmer should have issued a fortnight ago if he was any kind of a leader, but he's not. Proof of that is 2 weeks on, he's in open opposition to others leading figures within his own party, because just like always, he's on the wrong side of the argument and on the wrong side of history, and given he has been funded so heavily by pro-Israeli interests, it's impossible to believe his position isn't a bought and paid for one. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation with Starmer. Just to share how wrong-headed he actually is, has not only refused to apologise for his war crime advocation comments for the last 2 weeks, he's now confirmed in a meeting with his own Muslim MPs to their faces that he will not be apologising for that. Full stop. A truly weak man is one who cannot acknowledge and accept their own failings. And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so a night we feared was coming. The images that have come out of Gaza, a land that has literally been set on fire as Israel finally sent ground troops in amidst the heaviest bombardment yet seen since conflict flared up again once more on October the 7th. Last night, Israel cut off the power, plunging Gaza into darkness. Very difficult to film a genocide happening in the dark, after all. They also silenced those trapped within this concentration camp. For what other description is there when outside the walls are the controls to power food, fuel, water and medicines, and you cannot come and go as you wish, and you are regarded as beasts and animals instead of human by those with their hands on the levers? They silenced them by cutting off all outside communications as well, cutting off the last communications tower, and as such cutting off the internet and rendering mobile phones useless. We could have called for a ceasefire. People around the globe have demanded a ceasefire. The UN Security Council had a resolution before it to pass a ceasefire and impose it under international law, yet the US vetoed it, and we, the UK, abstained on it. None of our leaders did this in our name, though, so let's tell them as such. They've shamed all of us. They have blood on their hands, they are unfit for office, and they all need to go. Right, so overnight things escalated in the Gaza Strip as inevitably we feared they would. We knew they would push things as far as they felt they could get away with, and with Western leaders constantly gushing their support for this apartheid regime, they felt confident they could do whatever they wanted to and could do whatever they felt they wanted to. They could get away with. And so the power got cut off to Gaza, plunging them into darkness. Hospitals will have been relying on generator power, assuming they had enough fuel as things stood to keep them running in order to treat people, assuming they weren't being targeted by Israel like the Al-Ali Baptist Hospital was. I've not heard of any hospitals actually being hit last night. I have heard that there were near misses. Over the last few days, some 3,000 children have been killed. They aren't Hamas, they're kids. They're just the victims of the indiscriminate nature of the attacks by Israel, who don't really seem to be targeting Hamas, aren't really targeting Hamas. They're just hitting anything still standing. How else do you account for so many civilian casualties? They really don't seem to care who they hit. Some 1,600 people are apparently still trapped under rubble, their fate's unknown. The hospitals that have survived the attacks, they aren't being described as actually treating people right now. They are actually being described as refrigerators. They become more used as body storage. This isn't my assessment either. This is the assessment of a Palestinian delegate speaking to the United Nations. All communications were cut off as well, because nothing says intent to commit war crimes like gagging your victims and like blinding them and the rest of the outside world looking in. For as much as hospitals might have remained functional, there's a reason they might have become body storage more than treating people, because without communications, who can call an ambulance? Who can organise to help a search? Organise a search party and find people who might still be alive? Who, would be my question here, are the actual terrorists again in all of this? When the supposed wronged party, those the Western world hold up as the righteous, and those entitled to defend themselves, act such as this. Target such as those that they have targeted. How are they rescuing hostages like this? Amid stories of numerous journalists being killed. One notable target, it seems, has been the monument built to American Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, who, despite wearing her press jacket, was shot dead last year. It wasn't enough that she was killed by Israel, even her funeral got desecrated. The monument erected to her memory has now been destroyed too. We've been watching for 3 weeks now as hospitals, homes, shelters, innocent civilians, 70% of whom are women and children, be targeted deliberately by the Israeli state under the guise of hunting down Hamas terrorists and claiming to be intent on rescuing hostages. Images of the destruction, of the loss of life, are everywhere online right now as social media holds Israel to account for doing what it is doing, where all other news outlets and especially our Western political leaders fail to, refuse to. Entire neighbourhoods reduced to rubble. In the cold light of day, we're seeing video footage of people screaming, children crying looking for lost parents, ordinary people on their hands and knees trying to dig people out of the rubble, hoping to find people alive, and too often not. But let's not forget for one moment how we got here. The UN Security Council voted overwhelmingly for a ceasefire. Permanent members, however, can veto any action by the Council, and that's exactly what the United States did, backed up in no small way by fellow permanent member, the United Kingdom, who abstained, acting of course under the instruction of their respective governments, the administrations of Joe Biden and Rishi Sunak. But they're on the wrong side of public opinion in all of this. Last night, for example, thousands of Jewish protesters protesting against the actions of Israel, protesting for Palestine, opposing the brutality being shown by the Netanyahu administration, filled New York's Grand Central Station, only for the police to come in and start arresting people, even rabbis, for daring to do so. Here in the UK, we've seen protests too, another happening at midday today in London, a national march for Palestine starting at Victoria Embankment, if you could get there today. Other demos are happening elsewhere around the country today. If you could get to one of those, calling out our politicians here and their complicity in this and their failure. Rishi Sunak, the coward, the spineless one, the weakest Prime Minister we've seen probably in my lifetime, and his predecessor was comparable to a lettuce, who said he wanted Israel to win. Well, look at what you've egged on, you utter fool. Others in the Tory party falling over themselves to bow and scrape before Israel too, in their one-sided favouring of the regime, who we, of course, supply arms to, which can't possibly have anything to do with it, can it? And then you look at the Labour Party, the party supposedly set up to stand up and stand by ordinary people, and the fact they've aligned themselves with the regime of apartheid Israel, arguably even more than the Tories are. Led by a Zionist without qualification, a man who wouldn't call for a ceasefire, who won't, apparently, unless the US leads him by the nose first, who has even advocated for Israel's right to commit war crimes, such as the cutting off of power, as we saw last night, and the fact he would never apologise for it, and has refused to ever do so. Keir Starmer has arguably given the green light to what Israel did last night through the cutting off of that power more than anyone else I can think of. And not one single Labour MP, Labour shadow minister, has resigned over any of this. All of them have put career before doing what is human. Labour councillors up and down the country have quit the party in disgust, but not higher up. What is wrong with you people? You see what you're advocating here and you're okay with this? Well, I don't want you within 1,000 miles of power here, if that's how you think. Because if this is how you think, if this is what you support by standing by Starmer, then you ain't Labour. And what will you do in this country to us? Not any of you. We need a ceasefire to save lives, and there are some within Labour and some outside of it, some associated with it, who are actually calling for that. The TUC, and Ash Sarwar, the Scottish Labour leader, Sadiq Khan, the London Mayor, Andy Burnham, the Manchester Metro Mayor, Tracy Brabin, the West Yorkshire Mayor, not to mention 89% of ordinary Labour members. If you could get to a march today, join it. Be part of history. Say you made a stand. That you did your part for people who have been oppressed for far, far too long, now being attacked under the guise of targeting terrorists. Send a message to those leaders backing Israel that if that is their choice, then they don't represent us, and that we won't be voting for them until they do. And if that doesn't happen, then we will take our votes elsewhere. It's the only power we have to exercise against them. It's the only thing we have to hold over them. Will you exercise it for the people of Palestine? Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Do have your say on this in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, there's a video recommendation where, as if to underline Starmer's support for Israel over Palestine, he might have banned elected Labour officials from attending pro-Palestine protests, but he let a shadow minister speak at a pro-Israel one. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so despite the fact there are estimated to be in the region of 500,000 people demonstrating in London alone today in favour of Palestine, especially poignant after the night of sheer terror citizens of the Gaza Strip have endured overnight, having been bombarded ceaselessly, white phosphorus again having been deployed, and the senseless shelling of residential areas and public service buildings, all under the guise of hitting Hamas, an excuse, frankly, which is becoming harder and harder to swallow by more and more people. And that's despite Western media and leaders still backing the oppressors over the oppressed. Few politicians have been more sycophantically sickening than Labour leader Keir Starmer over this, though, and his unquestioning absolute support for the Israeli state no matter what. And despite those protests going on today, a statement has come out from his spokesperson reiterating all of this. But behind all of that, the cracks are starting to show. Where one shadow minister had dared speak out against Starmer's Labour position on voicing support for Palestine before, that number has now grown to 12 shadow ministers at time of writing. So far, Starmer has not sacked anyone, but will he allow this dissent to stand, undermining his own authority, or will he finally admit that he's on the wrong side of this, and does it matter when he's resisted that for so long? Is it too late for him now, and is that why some are finding the spine to oppose his senseless diktat? Right, so protests and demonstrations in favour of Palestine are happening up and down the country today, and with estimates of up to 500,000 people in London alone showing solidarity with Palestine in the face of genocide, this looks to be the biggest call to our politicians of both sides, who are still resolutely standing by Israel, despite the death and destruction they are raining down on innocent civilians, that we aren't putting up with it, that we expect better, that they have it wrong, and above all, that they do not speak for us in this matter. Despite all of that, though, at least one leader is refusing point blank to bunch an inch on this. Is still resolutely standing by Israel, taking the side of the colonizer, the side of the oppressor. And as much as the attacks by Hamas are rightly and justifiably condemnable, and we all should, the counter-offensive mounted by Israel is utterly inhumane, completely disproportionate, and amounts to little more than ethnic cleansing and genocide. As if Hamas just gave them the excuse to do what they really wanted, which is to eradicate the Palestinian population there. Starmer has this afternoon issued a statement reiterating his frankly untenable position, refusing to accept he's wrong, because frankly, I don't think he's capable of it. He can't apologise for blatantly advocating for war crimes. He won't back down here and now either. And frankly, when he's looking at his polling numbers and seeing a general election majority on the cards, he sees no reason to shift on anything. Arrogant and then some, but he's right. For as much as you might chant shame on you at him, if you're still going to vote for him or his party right now at the end of the day, then what are you achieving and what exactly is he losing? His statement from a spokesperson nevertheless reads, "Of course we understand why people want to call for a ceasefire. The Palestinian people are not Hamas and they are suffering terribly. That's why we support humanitarian pauses, so that aid, fuel, water, electricity and medicines can urgently get to those who need it. We also have to recognise that Israel was subject to a vile terrorist attack. Israel has a right and a duty to defend itself, rescue hostages and stop Hamas from being able to carry out that sort of terrorist attack ever again. Hamas are currently firing rockets into Israel and have built infrastructure, including tunnels, from which to carry out further attacks. So that military operation is ongoing. That must be done within international law, and aid must get in quickly, safely and regularly to halt a humanitarian disaster." I find it impossibly hard not to be angry after reading that. He's treating us all like idiots. As if we can't see for ourselves what is going on here. This violence, arguably the first in history to be utterly exposed as it is being by social media, and the lies and excuses of the media, the mainstream media, and pathetic low-life politicians like Starmer is getting completely undermined. Humanitarian pauses are a nonsense excuse invented by the US to pretend they care whilst Israel continues to commit war crimes. International law must be upheld despite thousands of dead civilian Palestinians being the literal proof that collective punishment is what is going on, a war crime and therefore not within international law. A ceasefire ends that killing, but by treating us like infants who don't get it, you advocate for the killing to continue instead. 70% of the population of Gaza are women and children, but don't stop the shooting, is what you're saying. Well, I cannot and I will not accept that. You have to be twisted beyond all reason to believe that. But such are the people we've all elected into power and positions of authority. Hamas have built infrastructure to launch attacks from, so explain why hospitals, churches and mosques are being hit then. Aid is getting hit too, and the fact this got written, mentioning electricity, literally the following day from Israel plunging Gaza into total darkness, is probably the most gut-wrenching element of that statement. You sick fuckers. You damn well know the power is off. Let's not forget that Starmer refuses to apologise, has ruled out apologising for advocating for Israel to do exactly that. So this statement tells me that was no accident, that he damn well meant it. And it should bury any semblance of this guy ever having been a human rights advocate. He won't apologise because he meant it. And this statement, in my opinion, reinforces that. Go ahead, tell me how you'll vote for him at the next election now. Go on. Well, finally, if you want to see some semblance of sanity, some glimpse of light, some small semblance of somebody speaking out against him from within the Labour Party ranks, within Starmer's shadow government, then the fact a dozen of his shadow ministers at time of writing have now spoken out in favour of a ceasefire and against the collective responsibility they are bound by, sackable offences in any other time. Imran Hussain, Mary Kelly Foy, Rachel Hopkins, Sarah Owen, Yasmin Qureshi, Paula Barker, Andy Slaughter, Afzal Khan, Rushanara Ali, and shockingly Jess Phillips have now all departed from the official party line. In several of these cases, notably Phillips, they have substantial Muslim populations in their constituencies. They know, therefore, that re-election is depending on how they're speaking out now and whose side they're on. So shadow ministerial posts perhaps are a price worth paying to them in order to keep their seats, perhaps. Maybe that's the thinking of some. Maybe that's just me being a cynic. But Others of Muslim MPs themselves may have been in that meeting the other day where Starmer told them to their faces that he was not going to apologise for saying Israel had the right to cut off water and power, and how that might have made them feel, in a party they know is already hampered by accusations of Islamophobia. Afzal Khan is one of those MPs. He tweeted out, "The loss of innocent life in Gaza is unprecedented and it cannot go on. We need an immediate ceasefire now." Others have made similar tweets. Some have retweeted the words of UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who wrote, "I reiterate my appeal for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, together with the unconditional release of hostages and the delivery of relief at a level corresponding to the dramatic needs of the people in Gaza, where a humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding in front of our eyes." Others have written their own messages and posts. Others have retweeted and reposted other similar messages to that Guterres produced. Is this going to go any further? Well, I hope so. The ball's rolling and Starmer hasn't sacked any of these 12 dissenters yet, though of course he might. If he does sack them, it'll very rapidly bring into question what is more important to him, having a team to govern this country or his devotion to Israel. If he doesn't act against them, that will, I hope, embolden others to speak out against him too. Because this man isn't fit to run a bath, never mind this country. We're sick of weak, insipid, grovelling leaders in this country. We've got Rishi Sunak for that already. We don't need a choice again between more of him or someone just as weak and just beholden to others as he is in Keir Starmer. And we definitely need someone who is on the side of humanity and of decency and not the side of apartheid and oppression. Otherwise, what do you think they'll do to us if they think they can get away with it? Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where yesterday London Mayor Sadiq Khan issued a video statement calling for a ceasefire as well, further undermining Keir Starmer's completely untenable position, made even more so today. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.